Tonight you are exactly where you need to be. You've found your way to a quiet little corner of the night, where the world slows down, the stars begin to whisper, and soft stories drift like moonlight through the dark. I'm so glad you're here. Before we begin tonight's story, I just want to gently ask, if you find comfort in these bedtime moments, it would mean the world if you'd take a second to like this video, subscribe, or even share it with someone else who could use a little peace. Your support helps keep this cozy space glowing night after night. Now settle in, let the day melt away, and let's begin. Once upon a time, there was a goldsmith who lived in a certain village where the people were as bad and greedy and covetous as they could possibly be. However, in spite of his surroundings, he was fat and prosperous. He had only one friend whom he liked, and that was a cowherd who looked after cattle for one of the farmers in the village. Every evening the goldsmith would walk across to the cowherd's house and say, "Come, let's go out for a walk." Now the cowherd didn't like walking in the evening because, he said, he had been out grazing the cattle all day and was glad to sit down when night came. But the goldsmith always worried him so that the poor man had to go against his will. This at last so annoyed him that he tried to think how he could pick a quarrel with the goldsmith so that he should not beg him to walk with him any more. He asked another cowherd for advice, and he said the best thing he could do was to go across and kill the goldsmith's wife, for then the goldsmith would be sure to regard him as an enemy. So, being a foolish person, and there being no laws in that country by which a man would be certainly punished for such a crime, the cowherd one evening took a big stick and went across to the goldsmith's house when only Mrs. Goldsmith was at home, and banged her on the head so hard that she died then and there. When the goldsmith came back and found his wife dead, he said nothing, but just took her outside into the dark lane and propped her up against the wall of his house, and then went into the courtyard and waited. Presently a rich stranger came along the lane, and seeing someone there, as he supposed, he said, "Good evening, friend. A fine night tonight." But the goldsmith's wife said nothing. The man then repeated his words louder, but still there was no reply. A third time he shouted, "Good evening, friend. Are you deaf?" But the figure never replied. Then the stranger, being angry at what he thought very rude behavior, picked up a big stone and threw it at Mrs. Goldsmith, crying, "Let that teach you manners." Instantly poor Mrs. Goldsmith tumbled over, and the stranger, horrified at seeing what he had done, was immediately seized by the goldsmith, who ran out screaming, "Wretch! You have killed my wife! O miserable one! We will have justice done to thee." With many protestations and reproaches they wrangled together, the stranger entreating the goldsmith to say nothing, and he would pay him handsomely to atone for the sad accident. At last the goldsmith quieted down and agreed to accept 1,000 gold pieces from the stranger, who immediately helped him to bury his poor wife, and then rushed off to the guest house, packed up his things, and was off by daylight, lest the goldsmith should repent and accuse him as the murderer of his wife. Now it very soon appeared that the goldsmith had a lot of extra money, so that people began to ask questions, and finally demanded of him the reason for his sudden wealth. "Oh," said he, "my wife died, and I sold her." "You sold your dead wife?" cried the people. "Yes," said the goldsmith. "For how much?" "1,000 gold pieces," replied the goldsmith. Instantly the villagers went away, and each caught hold of his own wife and throttled her, and the next day they all went off to sell their dead wives. Many a weary mile did they tramp, but got nothing but hard words or laughter or directions to the nearest cemetery from people to whom they offered dead wives for sale. At last they perceived that they had been cheated somehow by that goldsmith. So off they rushed home, seized the unhappy man, and without listening to his cries and entreaties, hurried him down to the river bank and flung him, plop, into the deepest, weediest, and nastiest place they could find. "That will teach him to play tricks on us," said they, "for as he can't swim he'll drown, and we shan't have any more trouble with him." Now the goldsmith really could not swim, and as soon as he was thrown into the deep river he sank below the surface. So his enemies went away believing that they had seen the last of him. But in reality he was carried down, half drowned, below the next bend in the river, where he fortunately came across a snag floating in the water. A snag is, you know, a part of a tree or bush which floats very nearly under the surface of the water. And he held on to this snag, and by great good luck eventually came ashore some 2 or 3 miles down the river. At the place where he landed he came across a fine, fat cow buffalo, and immediately he jumped on her back and rode home. When the village people saw him, they ran out in surprise and said, "Where on earth do you come from, and where did you get that buffalo?" "Ah," said the goldsmith, "you little know what delightful adventures I have had. Why, down in that place in the river where you threw me in, I found meadows and trees and fine pastures and buffaloes and all kinds of cattle. In fact, I could hardly tear myself away, but I thought that I must really let you all know about it." "Oh, oh," thought the greedy village people, "if there are buffaloes to be had for the taking, we'll go after some too." Encouraged by the goldsmith, they nearly all ran off the very next morning to the river, and in order that they might get down quickly to the beautiful place the goldsmith told them of, they tied great stones onto their feet and their necks, and one after another they jumped into the water as fast as they could and were drowned. And whenever any one of them waved his hands about and struggled, the goldsmith would cry out, "Look! He's beckoning the rest of you to come. He's got a fine buffalo." And others who were doubtful would jump in until not one was left. Then the cunning goldsmith went back and took all the village for himself and became very rich indeed. But do you think he was happy? Not a bit. Lies never made a man happy yet. Truly he got the better of a set of wicked and greedy people, but only by being wicked and greedy himself, and, as it turned out, when he got so rich he got very fat, and at last was so fat that he couldn't move, and one day he got the apoplexy and died, and no one in the world cared the least bit. Once upon a time there lived near a forest a man and his wife and 2 girls. One girl was the daughter of the man, and the other the daughter of his wife. And the man's daughter was good and beautiful, but the woman's daughter was cross and ugly. However, her mother did not know that, but thought her the most bewitching maiden that ever was seen. One day the man called to his daughter and bade her come with him into the forest to cut wood. They worked hard all day, but in spite of the chopping they were very cold, for it rained heavily, and when they returned home they were wet through. Then, to his vexation, the man found that he had left his axe behind him, and he knew that if it lay all night in the mud it would become rusty and useless. So he said to his wife, "I have dropped my axe in the forest. Bid your daughter go and fetch it, for mine has worked hard all day and is both wet and weary." But the wife answered, "If your daughter is wet already, it is all the more reason that she should go and get the axe. Besides, she is a great strong girl, and a little rain will not hurt her, while my daughter would be sure to catch a bad cold." By long experience the man knew there was no good saying any more, and with a sigh he told the poor girl she must return to the forest for the axe. The walk took some time, for it was very dark, and her shoes often stuck in the mud, but she was brave as well as beautiful, and never thought of turning back merely because the path was both difficult and unpleasant. At last, with her dress torn by brambles that she could not see, and her fact scratched by the twigs on the trees, she reached the spot where she and her father had been cutting in the morning, and found the axe in the place he had left it. To her surprise, 3 little doves were sitting on the handle, all of them looking very sad. "You poor little things," said the girl, stroking them. "Why do you sit there and get wet? Go and fly home to your nest. It will be much warmer than this. But first eat this bread which I saved from my dinner, and perhaps you will feel happier. It is my father's axe you are sitting on, and I must take it back as fast as I can, or I shall get a terrible scolding from my stepmother." She then crumbled the bread on the ground, and was pleased to see the doves flutter quite cheerfully towards it. "Goodbye," she said, picking up the axe, and went her way homewards. By the time they had finished all the crumbs, the doves felt much better, and were able to fly back to their nest in the top of a tree. "That is a good girl," said one. "I really was too weak to stretch out a wing before she came. I should like to do something to show how grateful I am." "Well, let us give her a wreath of flowers that will never fade as long as she wears it," cried another. And let the tiniest singing birds in the world sit amongst the flowers, rejoined the third. Yes, that will do beautifully, said the first. And when the girl stepped into her cottage, a wreath of rosebuds was on her head, and a crowd of little birds were singing unseen. The father, who was sitting by the fire, thought that, in spite of her muddy clothes, he had never seen his daughter looking so lovely. But the stepmother and the other girl grew wild with envy. How absurd to walk about on such a pouring night dressed up like that, she remarked crossly, and roughly pulled off the wreath as she spoke to place it on her own daughter. As she did so, the roses became withered and brown, and the birds flew out of the window. "See what a trumpery thing it is," cried the stepmother, "and now take your supper and go to bed, for it is near upon midnight." But though she pretended to despise the wreath, she longed none the less for her daughter to have one like it. Now it happened that the next evening the father, who had been alone in the forest, came back a second time without his axe. The stepmother's heart was glad when she saw this, and she said quite mildly, "Why, you have forgotten your axe again, you careless man. But now your daughter shall stay at home, and mine shall go and bring it back." And throwing a cloak over the girl's shoulders, she bade her hasten to the forest. With a very ill grace the damsel set forth, grumbling to herself as she went. For though she wished for the wreath, she did not at all want the trouble of getting it. By the time she reached the spot where her stepfather had been cutting the wood, the girl was in a very bad temper indeed. And when she caught sight of the axe, there were the 3 little doves, with drooping heads and soiled, bedraggled feathers, sitting on the handle. "You dirty creatures!" cried she. "Get away at once, or I will throw stones at you." And the doves spread their wings in a fright and flew up to the very top of a tree, their bodies shaking with anger. "What shall we do to revenge ourselves on her?" asked the smallest of the doves. "We were never treated like that before." "Never," said the biggest dove. "We must find some way of paying her back in her own coin." "I know," answered the middle dove. "She shall never be able to say anything but dirty creatures to the end of her life." "Oh, how clever of you! That will do beautifully," exclaimed the other 2. And they flapped their wings and clucked so loud with delight, and made such a noise, that they woke up all the birds in the trees close by. "What in the world is the matter?" asked the birds sleepily. "That is our secret," said the doves. Meanwhile the girl had reached home crosser than ever, but as soon as her mother heard her lift the latch of the door, she ran out to hear her adventures. "Well, did you get the wreath?" cried she. "Dirty creatures," answered her daughter. "Don't speak to me like that." "What do you mean?" asked the mother again. "Dirty creatures," repeated the daughter, and nothing else could she say. Then the woman saw that something evil had befallen her, and turned in her rage to her stepdaughter. "You are at the bottom of this, I know," she cried. and as the father was out of the way, she took a stick and beat the girl till she screamed with pain and went to bed sobbing. If the poor girl's life had been miserable before, it was 10 times worse now. For the moment her father's back was turned, the others teased and tormented her from morning till night, and their fury was increased by the sight of her wreath, which the doves had placed again on her head. Things went on like this for some weeks, when, one day, as the king's son was riding through the forest, he heard some strange birds singing more sweetly than birds had ever sung before. He tied his horse to a tree and followed where the sound led him, and, to his surprise, he saw before him a beautiful girl chopping wood with a wreath of pink rose. Buds, out of which the singing came. Standing in the shelter of a tree, he watched her a long while, and then, hat in hand, he went up and spoke to her. "Fair maiden, who are you, and who gave you that wreath of singing roses?" asked he. For the birds were so tiny that till you looked closely, you never saw them. "I live in a hut on the edge of the forest," she answered, blushing, for she had never spoken to a prince before. "As to the wreath, I know not how it came there, unless it may be the gift of some doves whom I fed when they were starving." The prince was delighted with this answer, which showed the goodness of the girl's heart. And besides, he had fallen in love with her beauty, and would not be content till she promised to return with him to the palace and become his bride. The old king was naturally disappointed at his son's choice of a wife, as he wished him to marry a neighboring princess. But as from his birth the prince had always done exactly as he liked, nothing was said, and a splendid wedding feast was got ready. The day after her marriage, the bride sent a messenger, bearing handsome presents to her father, and telling him of the good fortune which had befallen her. As may be imagined, the stepmother and her daughter were so filled with envy that they grew quite ill and had to take to their beds, and nobody would have been sorry if they had never got up again. But that did not happen. At length, however, they began to feel better, for the mother invented a plan by which she could be revenged on the girl who had never done her any harm. Her plan was this. In the town where she had lived before she was married, there was an old witch, who had more skill in magic than any other witch she knew. To this witch she would go and beg her to make her a mask with the face of her stepdaughter, and when she had the mask, the rest would be easy. She told her daughter what she meant to do, and although the daughter could only say, "Dirty creatures," in answer, she nodded and smiled and looked well pleased. Everything fell out exactly as the woman had hoped. By the aid of her magic mirror, the witch beheld the new princess walking in her gardens in a dress of green silk, and in a few minutes had produced a mask so like her that very few people could have told the difference. However, she counseled the woman that when her daughter first wore it, for that, of course, was what she intended her to do, she had better pretend that she had a toothache and cover her head with a lace veil. The woman thanked her and paid her well, and returned to her hut, carrying the mask under her cloak. In a few days she heard that a great hunt was planned, and the prince would leave the palace very early in the morning, so that his wife would be alone all day. This was a chance not to be missed, and taking her daughter with her, she went up to the palace, where she had never been before. The princess was too happy in her new home to remember all that she had suffered in the old one, and she welcomed them both gladly and gave them quantities of beautiful things to take back with them. At last she took them down to the shore to see a pleasure boat which her husband had made for her, and here the woman, seizing her opportunity, stole softly behind the girl and pushed her off the rock on which she was standing into the deep water, where she instantly sank to the bottom. Then she fastened the mask on her daughter, flung over her shoulders a velvet cloak which the princess had let fall, and finally arranged a lace veil over her head. "Rest your cheek on your hand, as if you were in pain when the prince returns," said the mother, "and be careful not to speak whatever you do. I will go back to the witch and see if she cannot take off the spell laid on you by those horrible birds." Ah, why did I not think of it before? No sooner had the prince entered the palace than he hastened to the princess's apartments, where he found her lying on the sofa, apparently in great pain. "My dearest wife, what is the matter with you?" he cried, kneeling down beside her and trying to take her hand. But she snatched it away and, pointing to her cheek, murmured something he could not catch. "What is it? Tell me. Is the pain bad? When did it begin? Shall I send for your ladies to bath the place?" asked the prince, pouring out these and a dozen other questions, to which the girl only shook her head. "But I can't leave you like this," he continued, starting up. "I must summon all the court physicians to apply soothing balsams to the sore place." And as he spoke, he sprang to his feet to go in search of them. Once came near her, the trick would at once be discovered, that she forgot her mother's counsel not to speak, and forgot even the spell that had been laid upon her, and catching hold of the prince's tunic, she cried in tones of entreaty, "Dirty creatures!" The young man stopped, not able to believe his ears, but supposed that pain had made the princess cross, as it sometimes does. However, he guessed somehow that she was to be left alone, so he only said, "Well, I dare say a little sleep will do you good, if you can manage to get it, and that you will wake up better tomorrow." Now that night happened to be very hot and airless, and the prince, after vainly trying to rest, at length got up and went to the window. Suddenly he beheld in the moonlight a form with a wreath of roses on her head rise out of the sea below him and step onto the sands, holding out her arms as she did so towards the palace. "That maiden is strangely like my wife," thought he. "I must see her closer." And he hastened down to the water. But when he got there, the princess, for she indeed it was, had disappeared completely, and he began to wonder if his eyes had deceived him. The next morning he went to the false bride's room, but her ladies told him she would neither speak nor get up, though she ate everything they set before her. The prince was sorely perplexed as to what could be the matter with her, for naturally he could not guess that she was expecting her mother to return every moment and to remove the spell the doves had laid upon her, and meanwhile was afraid to speak lest she should betray herself. At length he made up his mind to summon all the court physicians. He did not tell her what he was going to do, lest it should make her worse. But he went himself and begged the 4 learned leeches attached to the king's person to follow him to the princess's apartments. Unfortunately, as they entered, the princess was so enraged at the sight of them that she forgot all about the doves and shrieked out, "Dirty creatures! Dirty creatures!" which so offended the physicians that they left the room at once, and nothing that the prince could say would prevail on them to remain. He then tried to persuade his wife to send them a message that she was sorry for her rudeness, but not a word would she say. Late that evening, when he had performed all the tiresome duties which fall to the lot of every prince, the young man was leaning out of his window, refreshing himself with the cool breezes that blew off the sea. His thoughts went back to the scene of the morning, and he wondered if, after all, he had not made a great mistake in marrying a low-born wife, however beautiful she might be. How could he have imagined that the quiet, gentle girl who had been so charming a companion to him during the first days of their marriage could have become in a day the rude, sulky woman who could not control her temper even to benefit herself? One thing was clear. If she did not change her conduct very shortly, he would have to send her away from court. He was thinking these thoughts when his eyes fell on the sea beneath him, and there, as before, was the figure that so closely resembled his wife, standing with her feet in the water, holding out her arms to him. "Wait for me, wait for me, wait for me," he cried, not even knowing he was speaking. But when he reached the shore, there was nothing to be seen but the shadows cast by the moonlight. A state ceremonial in a city some distance off caused the prince to ride away at daybreak, and he left without seeing his wife again. "Perhaps she may have come to her senses by tomorrow," said he to himself. "And, anyhow, if I am going to send her back to her father, it might be better if we did not meet in the meantime." Then he put the matter from his mind and kept his thoughts on the duty that lay before him. It was nearly midnight before he returned to the palace, but instead of entering, he went down to the shore and hid behind a rock. He had scarcely done so when the girl came out of the sea and stretched out her arms towards his window. In an instant the prince had seized her hand, and though she made a frightened struggle to reach the water, for she in her turn had had a spell laid upon her, he held her fast. "You are my own wife, and I shall never let you go," he said. But the words were hardly out of his mouth when he found that it was a hare that he was holding by the paw. Then the hare changed into a fish, and the fish into a bird, and the bird into a slimy, wriggling snake. This time the prince's hand nearly opened of itself, but with a strong effort he kept his fingers shut, and drawing his sword cut off its head, when the spell was broken, and the girl stood before him as he had seen her first, the wreath upon her head, and the birds singing for joy. The very next morning the stepmother arrived at the palace with an ointment that the old witch had given her to place upon her daughter's tongue, which would break the dove's spell if the rightful bride had really been drowned in the sea. If not, then it would be useless. The mother assured her that she had seen her stepdaughter sink, and that there was no fear that she would ever come up again. But to make all quite safe, the old woman might bewitch the girl, and so she did. After that, the wicked stepmother traveled all through the night to get to the palace as soon as possible, and made her way straight into her daughter's room. "I have got it! I have got it!" she cried triumphantly, and laid the ointment on her daughter's tongue. "Now what do you say?" she asked proudly. "Dirty creatures, dirty creatures," answered the daughter, and the mother wrung her hands and wept, as she knew that all her plans had failed. At this moment the prince entered with his real wife. "You both deserved death," he said, "and if it were left to me, you should have it. But the princess has begged me to spare your lives, so you will be put into a ship and carried off to a desert island, where you will stay till you die." Then the ship was made ready, and the wicked woman and her daughter were placed in it, and it sailed away, and no more was heard of them. But the prince and his wife lived together long and happily, and ruled their people well. One time, a Nook became tired of his beautiful life and longed for something new to do. The Nooks have more wonderful powers than any other immortal folk, except, perhaps, the fairies and Ryls. So one would suppose that a Nook who might gain anything he desired by a simple wish could not be otherwise than happy and contented. But such was not the case with Popopo, the Nook we are speaking of. He had lived thousands of years and had enjoyed all the wonders he could think of. Yet life had become as tedious to him now as it might be to one who was unable to gratify a single wish. Finally, by chance, Popopo thought of the earth people who dwell in cities, and so he resolved to visit them and see how they lived. This would surely be fine amusement, and serve to pass away many wearisome hours. Therefore, one morning, after a breakfast so dainty that you could scarcely imagine it, Popopo set out for the earth, and at once was in the midst of a big city. His own dwelling was so quiet and peaceful that the roaring noise of the town startled him. His nerves were so shocked that before he had looked around 3 minutes, he decided to give up the adventure, and instantly returned home. This satisfied for a time his desire to visit the earth cities, but soon the monotony of his existence again made him restless and gave him another thought. At night the people slept, and the cities would be quiet. He would visit them at night, So at the proper time, Popopo transported himself in a jiffy to a great city, where he began wandering about the streets. Everyone was in bed. No wagons rattled along the pavements. No throngs of busy men shouted and helloed. Even the policemen slumbered slyly, and there happened to be no prowling thieves abroad. His nerves being soothed by the stillness, Popopo began to enjoy himself. He entered many of the houses and examined their rooms with much curiosity. Locks and bolts made no difference to a nook, and he saw as well in darkness as in daylight. After a time he strolled into the business portion of the city. Stores are unknown among the immortals, who have no need of money or of barter and exchange. So Popopo was greatly interested by the novel sight of so many collections of goods and merchandise. During his wanderings he entered a millinery shop, and was surprised to see within a large glass case a great number of women's hats, each bearing in one position or another a stuffed bird. Indeed, some of the most elaborate hats had 2 or 3 birds upon them. Now knooks are the especial guardians of birds, and love them dearly. To see so many of his little friends shut up in a glass case annoyed and grieved Popopo, who had no idea they had purposely been placed upon the hats by the milliner. So he slid back one of the doors of the case, gave the little chirruping whistle of the knooks that all birds know well, and called, "Come, friends, the door is open. Fly out." Popopo did not know the birds were stuffed, but stuffed or not, every bird is bound to obey a knook's whistle and a knook's call. So they left the hats, flew out of the case, and began fluttering about the room. "Poor dears," said the kind-hearted knook, "you long to be in the fields and forests again." Then he opened the outer door for them and cried, "Off with you! Fly away, my beauties, and be happy again." The astonished birds at once obeyed, and when they had soared away into the night air, the knook closed the door and continued his wandering through the streets. By dawn he saw many interesting sights, but day broke before he had finished the city, and he resolved to come the next evening a few hours earlier. As soon as it was dark the following day, he came again to the city, and on passing the millinery shop noticed a light within. Entering, he found 2 women, one of whom leaned her head upon the table and sobbed bitterly, while the other strove to comfort her. Of course, Popopo was invisible to mortal eyes, so he stood by and listened to their conversation. "Cheer up, sister," said one. "Even though your pretty birds have all been stolen, the hats themselves remain." "Alas!" cried the other, who was the milliner, "no one will buy my hats partly trimmed, for the fashion is to wear birds upon them, and if I cannot sell my goods I shall be utterly ruined." Then she renewed her sobbing, and the knook stole away, feeling a little ashamed to realize that in his love for the birds he had unconsciously wronged one of the earth people and made her unhappy. This thought brought him back to the millinery shop later in the night, when the 2 women had gone home. He wanted in some way to replace the birds upon the hats, that the poor woman might be happy again. So he searched until he came upon a nearby cellar full of little gray mice, who lived quite undisturbed and gained a livelihood by gnawing through the walls into neighboring houses and stealing food from the pantries. Here are just the creatures, thought Popopo, to place upon the woman's hats. Their fur is almost as soft as the plumage of the birds, and it strikes me the mice are remarkably pretty and graceful animals. Moreover, they now pass their lives in stealing, and were they obliged to remain always upon women's hats, their morals would be much improved. So he exercised a charm that drew all the mice from the cellar and placed them upon the hats in the glass case, where they occupied the places the birds had vacated and looked very becoming, at least in the eyes of the unworldly Knook. To prevent their running about and leaving the hats, Popopo rendered them motionless, and then he was so pleased with his work that he decided to remain in the shop and witness the delight of the milliner when she saw how daintily her hats were now trimmed. She came in the early morning, accompanied by her sister, and her face wore a sad and resigned expression. After sweeping and dusting the shop and drawing the blinds, she opened the glass case and took out a hat. But when she saw a tiny gray mouse nestling among the ribbons and laces, she gave a loud shriek, and dropping the hat, sprang with one bound to the top of the table. The sister, knowing the shriek to be one of fear, leaped upon a chair and exclaimed, "What is it? Oh, what is it?" "A mouse!" gasped the milliner, trembling with terror. Popopo, seeing this commotion, now realized that mice are especially disagreeable to human beings, and that he had made a grave mistake in placing them upon the hats. So he gave a low whistle of command that was heard only by the mice. Instantly they all jumped from the hats, dashed out the open door of the glass case, and scampered away to their cellar. But this action so frightened the milliner and her sister that after giving several loud screams they fell upon their backs on the floor and fainted away. Popopo was a kind-hearted Knook, but on witnessing all this misery caused by his own ignorance of the ways of humans, he straightway wished himself at home, and so left the poor women to recover as best they could. Yet he could not escape a sad feeling of responsibility, and after thinking upon the matter, he decided that since he had caused the milliner's unhappiness by freeing the birds, he could set the matter right by restoring them to the glass case. He loved the birds, and disliked to condemn them to slavery again, but that seemed the only way to end the trouble. So he set off to find the birds. They had flown a long distance, but it was nothing to Popopo to reach them in a second, and he discovered them sitting upon the branches of a big chestnut tree and singing gaily. When they saw the Knook, the birds cried, "Thank you, Popopo. Thank you for setting us free." "Do not thank me," returned the Knook, "for I have come to send you back to the millinery shop." "Why?" demanded a blue jay angrily while the others stopped their songs. Because I find the woman considers you her property, and your loss has caused her much unhappiness, answered Popopo. But remember how unhappy we were in her glass case, said a robin redbreast gravely. And as for being her property, you are a knook, and the natural guardian of all birds. So you know that nature created us free. To be sure, wicked men shot and stuffed us and sold us to the milliner, but the idea of our being her property is nonsense. Popopo was puzzled. If I leave you free, he said, wicked men will shoot you again, and you will be no better off than before. Pooh! Exclaimed the blue jay. We cannot be shot now, for we are stuffed. Indeed, 2 men fired several shots at us this morning, but the bullets only ruffled our feathers and buried themselves in our stuffing. We do not fear men now. Listen, said Popopo sternly, for he felt the birds were getting the best of the argument. The poor milliner's business will be ruined if I do not return you to her shop. It seems you are necessary to trim the hats properly. It is the fashion for women to wear birds upon their headgear. So the poor milliner's wares, although beautified by lace and ribbons, are worthless unless you are perched upon them. Fashions, said a blackbird solemnly, are made by men. What law is there among birds or knooks that requires us to be the slaves of fashion? What have we to do with fashions anyway? Screamed a linnet. If it were the fashion to wear knooks perched upon women's hats, would you be contented to stay there? Answer me, Popopo. But Popopo was in despair. He could not wrong the birds by sending them back to the milliner, nor did he wish the milliner to suffer by their loss. So he went home to think what could be done. After much meditation, he decided to consult the king of the Knooks, and going at once to his majesty, he told him the whole story. The king frowned. This should teach you the folly of interfering with earth people, he said. But since you have caused all this trouble, it is your duty to remedy it. Our birds cannot be enslaved, that is certain. Therefore you must have the fashions changed, so it will no longer be stylish for women to wear birds upon their hats. How shall I do that? Asked Popopo. Easily enough. Fashions often change among the earth people who tire quickly of any one thing. When they read in their newspapers and magazines that the style is so and so, they never question the matter, but at once obey the mandate of fashion. So you must visit the newspapers and magazines and enchant the types. Enchant the types, echoed Popopo in wonder. Just so. Make them read that it is no longer the fashion to wear birds upon hats. That will afford relief to your poor milliner and at the same time set free thousands of our darling birds who have been so cruelly used. Popopo thanked the wise king and followed his advice. The office of every newspaper and magazine in the city was visited by the Knook, and then he went to other cities, until there was not a publication in the land that had not a new fashion note in its pages. Sometimes Popopo enchanted the types, so that whoever read the print would see only what the Knook wished them to. Sometimes he called upon the busy editors and befuddled their brains until they wrote exactly what he wanted them to. Mortals seldom know how greatly they are influenced by fairies, nooks, and ryls, who often put thoughts into their heads that only the wise little immortals could have conceived. The following morning, when the poor milliner looked over her newspaper, she was overjoyed to read that no woman could now wear a bird upon her hat and be in style, for the newest fashion required only ribbons and laces. Popopo after this found much enjoyment in visiting every millinery shop he could find and giving new life to the stuffed birds which were carelessly tossed aside as useless. And they flew to the fields and forests with songs of thanks to the good Nook who had rescued them. Sometimes a hunter fires his gun at a bird and then wonders why he did not hit it. But having read this story, you will understand that the bird must have been a stuffed one from some millinery shop, which cannot, of course, be killed by a gun. On one of the upper branches of the Congo River lived an ancient and aristocratic family of hippopotamuses, which boasted a pedigree dating back beyond the days of Noah, beyond the existence of mankind, far into the dim ages when the world was new. They had always lived upon the banks of this same river, so that every curve and sweep of its waters, every pit and shallow of its bed, every rock and stump and wallow upon its bank was as familiar to them as their own mothers. And they are living there yet, I suppose. Not long ago the queen of this tribe of hippopotamuses had a child which she named Kio, because it was so fat and round. Still, that you may not be misled, I will say that in the hippopotamus language, Kio, properly translated, means fat and lazy, instead of fat and round. However, no one called the queen's attention to this error, because her tusks were monstrous long and sharp, and she thought Kio the sweetest baby in the world. He was, indeed, all right for a hippopotamus. He rolled and played in the soft mud of the river bank, and waddled inland to nibble the leaves of the wild cabbage that grew there, and was happy and contented from morning till night. And he was the jolliest hippopotamus that ancient family had ever known. His little red eyes were forever twinkling with fun, and he laughed his merry laugh on all occasions, whether there was anything to laugh at or not. Therefore the black people who dwelt in that region called him Ippy, the jolly one, although they dared not come anigh him on account of his fierce mother, and his equally fierce uncles and aunts and cousins who lived in a vast colony upon the river bank. And while these black people who lived in little villages scattered among the trees dared not openly attack the royal family of hippopotamuses, they were amazingly fond of eating hippopotamus meat whenever they could get it. This was no secret to the hippopotamuses, and again, when the blacks managed to catch these animals alive, they had a trick of riding them through the jungles as if they were horses, thus reducing them to a condition of slavery. Therefore, having these things in mind, Whenever the tribe of hippopotamuses smelled the oily odor of black people, they were accustomed to charge upon them furiously, and if by chance they overtook one of the enemy, they would rip him with their sharp tusks, or stamp him into the earth with their huge feet. It was continual warfare between the hippopotamuses and the black people. Gooey lived in one of the little villages of the blacks. He was the son of the chief's brother and grandson of the village sorcerer, the latter being an aged man known as the boneless wonder, because he could twist himself into as many coils as a serpent, and had no bones to hinder his bending his flesh into any position. This made him walk in a wobbly fashion, but the black people had great respect for him. Gooey's hut was made of branches of trees stuck together with mud, and his clothing consisted of a grass mat tied around his middle. But his relationship to the chief and the sorcerer gave him a certain dignity, and he was much addicted to solitary thought. Perhaps it was natural that these thoughts frequently turned upon his enemies, the hippopotamuses, and that he should consider many ways of capturing them. Finally, he completed his plans, and set about digging a great pit in the ground, midway between two sharp curves of the river. When the pit was finished, he covered it over with small branches of trees, and strewed earth upon them, smoothing the surface so artfully that no one would suspect there was a big hole underneath. Then Gooey laughed softly to himself and went home to supper. That evening the queen said to Keo, who was growing to be a fine child for his age, "I wish you'd run across the bend and ask your Uncle Nicky to come here. I have found a strange plant, and want him to tell me if it is good to eat." The Jolly One laughed heartily as he started upon his errand, for he felt as important as a boy does when he is sent for the first time to the corner grocery to buy a yeast cake. "Guck, uck, 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 guck, uck, uck, uck," was the way he laughed. And if you think a hippopotamus does not laugh this way, you have but to listen to one, and you will find I am right. He crawled out of the mud where he was wallowing and tramped away through the bushes, and the last his mother heard as she lay half in and half out of the water was his musical "Guck, uck, uck, uck," dying away in the distance. Keo was in such a happy mood that he scarcely noticed where he stepped, so he was much surprised when, in the middle of a laugh, the ground gave way beneath him, and he fell to the bottom of Gooey's deep pit. He was not badly hurt, but had bumped his nose severely as he went down, so he stopped laughing and began to think how he should get out again. Then he found the walls were higher than his head, and that he was a prisoner. So he laughed a little at his own misfortune, and the laughter soothed him to sleep, so that he snored all through the night until daylight came. When Gooey peered over the edge of the pit next morning, he exclaimed, "Why, 'tis Ippy, the Jolly One." Keo recognized the scent of a black man and tried to raise his head high enough to bite him, seeing which Gooey spoke in the hippopotamus language which he had learned from his grandfather the sorcerer. "Have peace, little one, you are my captive." "Yes, I will have a piece of your leg if I can reach it, retorted Keo, and then he laughed at his own joke. Gook-a-cock-cock! But Gooey, being a thoughtful black man, went away without further talk, and did not return until the following morning. When he again leaned over the pit, Keo was so weak from hunger that he could hardly laugh at all. "Do you give up?" asked Gooey, "or do you still wish to fight?" "What will happen if I give up?" inquired Keo. The black man scratched his woolly head in perplexity. "It is hard to say, Ippy. You are too young to work, and if I kill you for food I shall lose your tusks, which are not yet grown. Why, oh jolly one, did you fall into my hole? I wanted to catch your mother or one of your uncles." "Cook-cook-a-cock!" laughed Keo. "You must let me go, after all, black man, for I am of no use to you." "That I will not do," declared Gooey, "unless," he added as an afterthought, "you will make a bargain with me." "Let me hear about the bargain, black one, for I am hungry," said Keo. "I will let you go if you swear by the tusks of your grandfather that you will return to me in a year and a day and become my prisoner again." The youthful hippopotamus paused to think, for he knew it was a solemn thing to swear by the tusks of his grandfather. But he was exceedingly hungry, and a year and a day seemed a long time off. So he said, with another careless laugh, "Very well. If you will now let me go, I swear by the tusks of my grandfather to return to you in a year and a day and become your prisoner." Gooey was much pleased, for he knew that in a year and a day Keo would be almost full grown. So he began digging away one end of the pit and filling it up with the earth until he had made an incline which would allow the hippopotamus to climb out. Keo was so pleased when he found himself upon the surface of the earth again that he indulged in a merry fit of laughter, after which he said, "Goodbye, Gooey. In a year and a day you will see me again." Then he waddled away toward the river to see his mother and get his breakfast, and Gooey returned to his village. During the months that followed, as the black man lay in his hut or hunted in the forest, he heard at times the far-away "gook-uk-uk-uk" of the laughing hippopotamus, but he only smiled to himself and thought, "A year and a day will soon pass away." Now when Keo returned to his mother safe and well, every member of his tribe was filled with joy, for the Jolly One was a general favorite. But when he told them that in a year and a day he must again become the slave of the black man, they began to wail and weep, and so many were their tears that the river rose several inches. Of course, Keo only laughed at their sorrow, but a great meeting of the tribe was called and the matter discussed seriously. "Having sworn by the tusks of his grandfather," said Uncle Nicky, "he must keep his promise. But it is our duty to try in some way to rescue him from death or a life of slavery." To this all agreed, but no one could think of any method of saving Keo from his fate. So months passed away, during which all the royal hippopotamuses were sad and gloomy, except the Jolly One himself. Finally, but a week of freedom remained to Keo, and his mother, the queen, became so nervous and worried that another meeting of the tribe was called. By this time, the laughing hippopotamus had grown to enormous size and measured nearly 15 feet long and 6 feet high, while his sharp tusks were whiter and harder than those of an elephant. "Unless something is done to save my child," said the mother, "I shall die of grief." Then some of her relations began to make foolish suggestions, but presently Uncle Nep, a wise and very big hippopotamus, said, "We must go to Glinkomok and implore his aid." Then all were silent, for it was a bold thing to face the mighty Glinkomok. But the mother's love was equal to any heroism. "I will myself go to him if Uncle Nep will accompany me," she said quickly. Uncle Nep thoughtfully patted the soft mud with his forefoot and wagged his short tail leisurely from side to side. "We have always been obedient to Glinkomok and shown him great respect," said he. "Therefore I fear no danger in facing him. I will go with you." All the others snorted approval, being very glad they were not called upon to go themselves. So the Queen and Uncle Nep, with Keo swimming between them, set out upon their journey. They swam up the river all that day and all the next, until they came at sundown to a high, rocky wall, beneath which was the cave where the mighty Glinkomok dwelt. This fearful creature was part beast, part man, part fowl, and part fish. It had lived since the world began. Through years of wisdom it had become part sorcerer, part wizard, part magician, and part fairy. Mankind knew it not, but the ancient beasts knew and feared it. The 3 hippopotamuses paused before the cave, with their front feet upon the bank and their bodies in the water, and called in chorus a greeting to Glinkomok. Instantly thereafter the mouth of the cave darkened, and the creature glided silently toward them. The hippopotamuses were afraid to look upon it, and bowed their heads between their legs. "We come, O Glinkomok, to implore your mercy and friendly assistance," began Uncle Nep, and then he told the story of Keo's capture, and how he had promised to return to the black man. "He must keep his promise," said the creature, in a voice that sounded like a sigh. The mother hippopotamus groaned aloud. "But I will prepare him to overcome the black man and to regain his liberty," continued Glinkomok. Keo laughed. "Lift your right paw," commanded Glinkomok. Keo obeyed, and the creature touched it with its long, hairy tongue. Then it held 4 skinny hands over Keo's bowed head, and mumbled some words in a language unknown to man or beast or fowl or fish. After this, it spoke again in hippopotamese. "Your skin has now become so tough that no man can hurt you. Your strength is greater than that of 10 elephants. Your foot is so swift that you can distance the wind. Your wit is sharper than the bullhorn. Let the man fear, but drive fear from your own breast forever. For of all your race you are the mightiest." Then the terrible Glinkomok leaned over, and Keo felt its fiery breath scorch him as it whispered some further instructions in his ear. The next moment it glided back into its cave, followed by the loud thanks of the 3 hippopotamuses, who slid into the water and immediately began their journey home. The mother's heart was full of joy. Uncle Nep shivered once or twice as he remembered a glimpse he had caught of Glinkomok, but Keo was as jolly as possible, and not content to swim with his dignified elders, he dived under their bodies, raced all around them, and laughed merrily every inch of the way home. Then all the tribe held high jinks and praised the mighty Glinkomok for befriending their queen's son. And when the day came for the Jolly One to give himself up to the black man, they all kissed him goodbye without a single fear for his safety. Keo went away in good spirits, and they could hear his laughing "Guk, uck, uck, uck," long after he was lost in sight in the jungle. Gooey had counted the days and knew when to expect Keo, but he was astonished at the monstrous size to which his captive had grown, and congratulated himself on the wise bargain he had made. And Keo was so fat that Gooey determined to eat him, that is, all of him he possibly could, and the remainder of the carcass he would trade off to his fellow villagers. So he took a knife and tried to stick it into the hippopotamus, but the skin was so tough the knife was blunted against it. Then he tried other means, but Keo remained unhurt, and now indeed the Jolly One laughed his most gleeful laugh, till all the forest echoed the guk-guk-guk-guk-guk-guk. And Gooey decided not to kill him, since that was impossible, but to use him for a beast of burden. He mounted upon Keo's back and commanded him to march. So Keo trotted briskly through the village, his little eyes twinkling with merriment. The other blacks were delighted with Gooey's captive, and begged permission to ride upon the Jolly One's back. So Gooey bargained with them for bracelets and shell necklaces and little gold ornaments, until he had acquired quite a heap of trinkets. Then a dozen black men climbed upon Keo's back to enjoy a ride, and the one nearest his nose cried out, "Run, Mud Dog, run!" And Keo ran. Swift as the wind he strode, away from the village, through the forest, and straight up the river bank. The black men howled with fear, the Jolly One roared with laughter, and on they rushed. Then before them, on the opposite side of the river, appeared the black mouth of Glinkomok's cave. Keo dashed into the water, dived to the bottom, and left the black people struggling to swim out. But Glinkomok had heard the laughter of Keo and knew what to do. When the Jolly One rose to the surface and blew the water from his throat, there was no black man to be seen. Keo returned alone to the village, and Gooey asked with surprise, "Where are my brothers?" "I do not know," answered Keo. "I took them far away, and they remained where I left them." Gooey would have asked more questions then, but another crowd of black men impatiently waited to ride on the back of the laughing hippopotamus. So they paid the price and climbed to their seats. after which the foremost said, "Run, mud wallower, run!" And Keo ran as before and carried them to the mouth of Glencomok's cave and returned alone. But now Gooey became anxious to know the fate of his fellows, for he was the only black man left in his village. So he mounted the hippopotamus and cried, "Run, river hog, run!" Keo laughed his jolly "Guk-uk-uk-uk" and ran with the speed of the wind. But this time he made straight for the river bank where his own tribe lived. And when he reached it, he waded into the river, dived to the bottom, and left Gooey floating in the middle of the stream. The black man began swimming toward the right bank, but there he saw Uncle Nep and half the royal tribe waiting to stamp him into the soft mud. So he turned toward the left bank, and there stood the Queen Mother and Uncle Nicky, red-eyed and angry, waiting to tear him with their tusks. Then Gooey uttered loud screams of terror, and spying the Jolly One who swam near him, he cried, "Save me, Keo! Save me, and I will release you from slavery." "That is not enough," laughed Keo. "I will serve you all my life," screamed Gooey. "I will do everything you bid me." "Will you return to me in a year and a day and become my captive if I allow you to escape?" asked Keo. "I will, I will, I will," cried Gooey. "Swear it by the bones of your grandfather," commanded Keo, remembering that black men have no tusks to swear by. And Gooey swore it by the bones of his grandfather. Then Keo swam to the black one, who clambered upon his back again. In this fashion they came to the bank, where Keo told his mother and all the tribe of the bargain he had made with Gooey, who was to return in a year and a day and become his slave. Therefore the black man was permitted to depart in peace, and once more the Jolly One lived with his own people and was happy. When a year and a day had passed, Keo began watching for the return of Gooey, but he did not come, then or ever afterwards. For the black man had made a bundle of his bracelets and shell necklaces and little gold ornaments, and had traveled many miles into another country, where the ancient and royal tribe of hippopotamuses was unknown. And he set up for a great chief, because of his riches, and people bowed down before him. By day he was proud and swaggering, but at night he tumbled and tossed upon his bed and could not sleep. His conscience troubled him, for he had sworn by the bones of his grandfather, and his grandfather had no bones. Not many years ago there lived on a stony, barren New England farm a man and his wife. They were sober, honest people, working hard from early morning until dark to enable them to secure a scanty living from their poor land. Their house, a small one-storied building, stood upon the side of a steep hill, and the stones lay so thickly about it that scarce anything green could grow from the ground. At the foot of the hill, a quarter of a mile from the house by the winding path, was a small brook, and the woman was obliged to go there for water and to carry it up the hill to the house. This was a tedious task, and with the other hard work that fell to her share had made her gaunt and bent and lean. Yet she never complained, but meekly and faithfully performed her duties, doing the housework, carrying the water, and helping her husband hoe the scanty crop that grew upon the best part of their land. One day, as she walked down the path to the brook, her big shoes scattering the pebbles right and left, she noticed a large beetle lying upon its back and struggling hard with its little legs to turn over, that its feet might again touch the ground. But this it could not accomplish, so the woman, who had a kind heart, reached down and gently turned the beetle with her finger. At once it scampered from the path, and she went on to the brook. The next day, as she came for water, she was surprised to see the beetle again lying upon its back and struggling helplessly to turn. Once more the woman stopped and set him upon his feet, and then, as she stooped over the tiny creature, she heard a small voice say, "Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for saving me." Half frightened at hearing a beetle speak in her own language, the woman started back and exclaimed, "La sakes! Surely you can't talk like humans." Then, recovering from her alarm, she again bent over the beetle, who answered her, "Why shouldn't I talk if I have anything to say?" "'Cause you're a bug," replied the woman. "That is true, and you saved my life, saved me from my enemies, the sparrows. And this is the second time you have come to my assistance, so I owe you a debt of gratitude. Bugs value their lives as much as human beings, and I am a more important creature than you, in your ignorance, may suppose. But tell me, why do you come each day to the brook?" "For water," she answered, staring stupidly down at the talking beetle. "Isn't it hard work?" the creature inquired. "Yes, but there's no water on the hill," said she. "Then dig a well and put a pump in it," replied the beetle. She shook her head. "My man tried it once, but there was no water," she said sadly. "Try it again," commanded the beetle, "and in return for your kindness to me I will make this promise. If you do not get water from the well, you will get that which is more precious to you. I must go now. Do not forget. Dig a well." And then, without pausing to say goodbye, it ran swiftly away and was lost among the stones. The woman returned to the house much perplexed by what the beetle had said, and when her husband came in from his work, she told him the whole story. The poor man thought deeply for a time, and then declared, "Wife, there may be truth in what the bug told you. There must be magic in the world yet, if a beetle can speak. And if there is such a thing as magic, we may get water from the well. The pump I bought to use in the well, which proved to be dry, is now lying in the barn, and the only expense in following the talking bug's advice will be the labor of digging the hole. Labor I am used to, so I will dig the well." Next day he set about it and dug so far down in the ground that he could hardly reach the top to climb out again, but not a drop of water was found. "Perhaps you did not dig deep enough," his wife said when he told her of his failure. So the following day he made a long ladder, which he put into the hole, and then he dug and dug and dug until the top of the ladder barely reached the top of the hole, but still there was no water. When the woman next went to the brook with her pail, she saw the beetle sitting upon a stone beside her path. So she stopped and said, "My husband has dug the well, but there is no water." "Did he put the pump in the well?" asked the beetle. "No," she answered. "Then do as I commanded. Put in the pump, and if you do not get water, I promise you something still more precious." Saying which, the beetle swiftly slid from the stone and disappeared. The woman went back to the house and told her husband what the bug had said. "Well," replied the simple fellow, "there can be no harm in trying." So he got the pump from the barn and placed it in the well, and then he took hold of the handle and began to pump, while his wife stood by to watch what would happen. No water came, but after a few moments a gold piece dropped from the spout of the pump, and then another and another, until several handfuls of gold lay in a little heap upon the ground. The man stopped pumping then, and ran to help his wife gather the gold pieces into her apron. But their hands trembled so greatly through excitement and joy that they could scarcely pick up the sparkling coins. At last she gathered them close to her bosom, and together they ran to the house, where they emptied the precious gold upon the table and counted the pieces. All were stamped with the design of the United States Mint and were worth $5 each. Some were worn and somewhat discolored from use, while others seemed bright and new, as if they had not been much handled. When the value of the pieces was added together, they were found to be worth $300. Suddenly the woman spoke. "Husband, the beetle said truly when he declared we should get something more precious than water from the well. But run at once and take away the handle from the pump, lest anyone should pass this way and discover our secret." So the man ran to the pump and removed the handle, which he carried to the house and hid underneath the bed. They hardly slept a wink that night, lying awake to think of their good fortune and what they should do with their store of yellow gold. In all their former lives they had never possessed more than a few dollars at a time, and now the cracked teapot was nearly full of gold coins. The following day was Sunday, and they arose early and ran to see if their treasure was safe. There it lay, heaped snugly within the teapot, and they were so willing to feast their eyes upon it that it was long before the man could leave it to build the fire or the woman to cook the breakfast. While they ate their simple meal, the woman said, "We will go to church today and return thanks for the riches that have come to us so suddenly, and I will give the pastor one of the gold pieces." "It is well enough to go to church," replied her husband, "and also to return thanks. But in the night I decided how we will spend all our money, so there will be none left for the pastor." "We can pump more," said the woman. "Perhaps, and perhaps not," he answered cautiously. What we have we can depend upon, but whether or not there be more in the well I cannot say." "Then go and find out," she returned, "for I am anxious to give something to the pastor who is a poor man and deserving." So the man got the pump handle from beneath the bed, and going to the pump, fitted it in place. Then he set a large wooden bucket under the spout and began to pump. To their joy, the gold pieces soon began flowing into the pail, and seeing it about to run over the brim, the woman brought another pail. But now the stream suddenly stopped, and the man said cheerfully, "That is enough for today, good wife. We have added greatly to our treasure, and the parson shall have his gold piece. Indeed, I think I shall also put a coin into the contribution box." Then, because the teapot would hold no more gold, the farmer emptied the pail into the wood box, covering the money with dried leaves and twigs, that no one might suspect what lay underneath. Afterward they dressed themselves in their best clothing and started for the church, each taking a bright gold piece from the teapot as a gift to the pastor. Over the hill and down into the valley beyond they walked, feeling so gay and light-hearted that they did not mind the distance at all. At last they came to the little country church and entered just as the services began. Being proud of their wealth and of the gifts they had brought for the pastor, they could scarcely wait for the moment when the deacon passed the contribution box. But at last the time came, and the farmer held his hand high over the box and dropped the gold piece so that all the congregation could see what he had given. The woman did likewise, feeling important and happy at being able to give the good parson so much. The parson, watching from the pulpit, saw the gold drop into the box, and could hardly believe that his eyes did not deceive him. However, when the box was laid upon his desk, there were the 2 gold pieces, and he was so surprised that he nearly forgot his sermon. When the people were leaving the church at the close of the services, the good man stopped the farmer and his wife and asked, "Where did you get so much gold?" The woman gladly told him how she had rescued the beetle, and how, in return, they had been rewarded with the wonderful pump. The pastor listened to it all gravely, and when the story was finished, he said, "According to tradition, strange things happened in this world ages ago, and now I find that strange things may also happen today. For by your tale you have found a beetle that can speak and also has power to bestow upon you great wealth." Then he looked carefully at the gold pieces and continued, "Either this money is fairy gold or it is genuine metal, stamped at the mint of the United States government. If it is fairy gold, it will disappear within 24 hours, and will therefore do no one any good. If it is real money, then your beetle must have robbed someone of the gold and placed it in your well. For all money belongs to someone, and if you have not earned it honestly, but have come by it in the mysterious way you mention, it was surely taken from the persons who owned it without their consent. Where else could real money come from? The farmer and his wife were confused by this statement and looked guiltily at each other, for they were honest people and wished to wrong no one. "Then you think the beetle stole the money?" asked the woman. "By his magic powers he probably took it from its rightful owners. Even bugs which can speak have no consciences and cannot tell the difference between right and wrong. With a desire to reward you for your kindness, the beetle took from its lawful possessors the money you pumped from the well." "Perhaps it really is fairy gold," suggested the man. "If so, we must go to the town and spend the money before it disappears." "That would be wrong," answered the pastor, "for then the merchants would have neither money nor goods. To give them fairy gold would be to rob them." "What then shall we do?" asked the poor woman, wringing her hands with grief and disappointment. "Go home and wait until tomorrow. If the gold is then in your possession, it is real money and not fairy gold. But if it is real money, you must try to restore it to its rightful owners. Take also these pieces which you have given me, for I cannot accept gold that is not honestly come by." Sadly, the poor people returned to their home, being greatly disturbed by what they had heard. Another sleepless night was passed, and on Monday morning they arose at daylight and ran to see if the gold was still visible. "It is real money after all," cried the man, "for not a single piece has disappeared." When the woman went to the brook that day, she looked for the beetle, and sure enough, there he sat upon the flat stone. "Are you happy now?" asked the beetle, as the woman paused before him. "We are very unhappy," she answered. "For, although you have given us much gold, our good parson says it surely belongs to someone else, and was stolen by you to reward us." "Your parson may be a good man," returned the beetle with some indignation, "but he certainly is not overwise. Nevertheless, if you do not want the gold, I can take it from you as easily as I gave it." "But we do want it," cried the woman fearfully. "That is," she added, "if it is honestly come by." "It is not stolen," replied the beetle sulkily, "and now belongs to no one but yourselves. When you saved my life, I thought how I might reward you, and knowing you to be poor, I decided gold would make you happier than anything else. You must know," he continued, "that although I appear so small and insignificant, I am really king of all the insects, and my people obey my slightest wish. Living as they do close to the ground, the insects often come across gold and other pieces of money which have been lost by men and have fallen into cracks or crevasses, or become covered with earth or hidden by grass or weeds. Whenever my people find money in this way, they report the fact to me, but I have always let it lie, because it could be of no possible use to an insect. However, when I decided to give you gold, I knew just where to obtain it without robbing any of your fellow creatures. thousands of insects were at once sent by me in every direction to bring the pieces of lost gold to this hill. It cost my people several days of hard labor, as you may suppose. But by the time your husband had finished the well, the gold began to arrive from all parts of the country. And during the night, my subjects dumped it all into the well, so you may use it with a clear conscience, knowing that you wrong no one. This explanation delighted the woman, and when she returned to the house and reported to her husband what the beetle had said, he also was overjoyed. So they at once took a number of the gold pieces and went to the town to purchase provisions and clothing, and many things of which they had long stood in need. But so proud were they of their newly acquired wealth that they took no pains to conceal it. They wanted everyone to know they had money, and so it was no wonder that when some of the wicked men in the village saw the gold, they longed to possess it themselves. "If they spend this money so freely," whispered one to another, "there must be a great store of gold at their home." "That is true," was the answer. "Let us hasten there before they return and ransack the house." So they left the village and hurried away to the farm on the hill, where they broke down the door and turned everything topsy-turvy until they had discovered the gold in the wood box and the teapot. It did not take them long to make this into bundles, which they slung upon their backs and carried off. And it was probably because they were in a great hurry that they did not stop to put the house in order again. Presently the good woman and her husband came up the hill from the village with their arms full of bundles, and followed by a crowd of small boys who had been hired to help carry the purchases. Then followed others, youngsters and country louts, attracted by the wealth and prodigality of the pair, who from simple curiosity trailed along behind like the tail of a comet and helped swell the concourse into a triumphal procession. Last of all came Guggins, the shopkeeper, carrying with much tenderness a new silk dress which was to be paid for when they reached the house, all the money they had taken to the village having been lavishly expended. The farmer, who had formerly been a modest man, was now so swelled with pride that he tipped the rim of his hat over his left ear and smoked a big cigar that was fast making him ill. His wife strutted along beside him like a peacock, enjoying to the full the homage and respect her wealth had won from those who formerly deigned not to notice her, and glancing from time to time at the admiring procession in the rear. But alas for their newborn pride! When they reached the farmhouse, they found the door broken in, the furniture strewn in all directions, and their treasure stolen to the very last gold piece. The crowd grinned and made slighting remarks of a personal nature, and Guggins, the shopkeeper, demanded in a loud voice the money for the silk dress he had brought. Then the woman whispered to her husband to run and pump some more gold while she kept the crowd quiet, and he obeyed quickly. But after a few moments he returned with a white face to tell her the pump was dry, and not a gold piece could now be coaxed from the spout. The procession marched back to the village, laughing and jeering at the farmer and his wife, who had pretended to be so rich. And some of the boys were naughty enough to throw stones at the house from the top of the hill. Mr. Guggins carried away his dress after severely scolding the woman for deceiving him, and when the couple at last found themselves alone, their pride had turned to humiliation and their joy to bitter grief. Just before sundown, the woman dried her eyes and, having resumed her ordinary attire, went to the brook for water. When she came to the flat stone, she saw the king beetle sitting upon it. "The well is dry," she cried out angrily. "Yes," answered the beetle calmly. "You have pumped from it all the gold my people could find." "But we are now ruined," said the woman, sitting down in the path beginning to weep. "For robbers have stolen from us every penny we possessed." "I'm sorry," returned the beetle, "but it is your own fault. Had you not made so great a show of your wealth, no one would have suspected you possessed a treasure or thought to rob you. As it is, you have merely lost the gold which others have lost before you. It will probably be lost many times more before the world comes to an end." "But what are we to do now?" she asked. "What did you do before I gave you the money?" "We worked from morning till night," said she. "Then work still remains for you," remarked the beetle composedly. "No one will ever try to rob you of that, you may be sure." And he slid from the stone and disappeared for the last time. This story should teach us to accept good fortune with humble hearts and to use it with moderation. For had the farmer and his wife resisted the temptation to display their wealth ostentatiously, they might have retained it to this very day. The king of the polar bears lived among the icebergs in the far north country. He was old and monstrous big. He was wise and friendly to all who knew him. His body was thickly covered with long white hair that glistened like silver under the rays of the midnight sun. His claws were strong and sharp, that he might walk safely over the smooth ice or grasp and tear the fishes and seals upon which he fed. The seals were afraid when he drew near, and tried to avoid him, but the gulls, both white and gray, loved him because he left the remnants of his feasts for them to devour. Often his subjects, the polar bears, came to him for advice when ill or in trouble, but they wisely kept away from his hunting grounds, lest they might interfere with his sport and arouse his anger. The wolves, who sometimes came as far north as the icebergs, whispered among themselves that the king of the polar bears was either a magician or under the protection of a powerful fairy, for no earthly thing seemed able to harm him. He never failed to secure plenty of food, and he grew bigger and stronger day by day and year by year. Yet the time came when this monarch of the north met man, and his wisdom failed him. He came out of his cave among the icebergs one day, and saw a boat moving through the strip of water which had been uncovered by the shifting of the summer ice. In the boat were men. The great bear had never seen such creatures before, and therefore advanced toward the boat, sniffing the strange scent with aroused curiosity, and wondering whether he might take them for friends or foes, food or carrion. When the king came near the water's edge, a man stood up in the boat, and with a queer instrument made a loud bang. The polar bear felt a shock. His brain became numb, his thoughts deserted him, his great limbs shook and gave way beneath him, and his body fell heavily upon the hard ice. That was all he remembered for a time. When he awoke, he was smarting with pain on every inch of his huge bulk, for the men had cut away his hide with its glorious white hair and carried it with them to a distant ship. Above him circled thousands of his friends the gulls, wondering if their benefactor were really dead and it was proper to eat him. But when they saw him raise his head and groan and tremble, they knew he still lived. And one of them said to his comrades, "The wolves were right. The king is a great magician, for even men cannot kill him, but he suffers for lack of covering. Let us repay his kindness to us by each giving him as many feathers as we can spare." This idea pleased the gulls. One after another they plucked with their beaks the softest feathers from under their wings, and flying down, dropped them gently upon the body of the king of the polar bears. Then they called to him in a chorus, "Courage, friend! Our feathers are as soft and beautiful as your own shaggy hair. They will guard you from the cold winds and warm you while you sleep. Have courage then, and live." And the king of the polar bears had courage to bear his pain, and lived and was strong again. The feathers grew as they had grown upon the bodies of the birds, and covered him as his own hair had done. Mostly they were pure white in color, but some from the gray gulls gave his majesty a slight mottled appearance. The rest of that summer and all through the 6 months of night, the king left his icy cavern only to fish or catch seals for food. He felt no shame at his feathery covering, but it was still strange to him, and he avoided meeting any of his brother bears. During this period of retirement he thought much of the men who had harmed him, and remembered the way they had made the great bang, and he decided it was best to keep away from such fierce creatures. Thus he added to his store of wisdom. When the moon fell away from the sky and the sun came to make the icebergs glitter with the gorgeous tintings of the rainbow, 2 of the polar bears arrived at the king's cavern to ask his advice about the hunting season. But when they saw his great body covered with feathers instead of hair, they began to laugh, and one said, "Our mighty king has become a bird. Who ever before heard of a feathered polar bear?" Then the king gave way to wrath. He advanced upon them with deep growls and stately tread, and with one blow of his monstrous paw stretched the mocker lifeless at his feet. The other ran away to his fellows and carried the news of the king's strange appearance. The result was a meeting of all the polar bears upon a broad field of ice, where they talked gravely of the remarkable change that had come upon their monarch. "He is in reality no longer a bear," said one, "nor can he justly be called a bird, but he is half bird and half bear, and so unfitted to remain our king." "Then who shall take his place?" asked another. "He who can fight the bird bear and overcome him," answered an aged member of the group. "Only the strongest is fit to rule our race." There was silence for a time, but at length a great bear moved to the front and said, "I will fight him. Woof, the strongest of our race, and I will be king of the polar bears." The others nodded assent and dispatched a messenger to the king to say he must fight the great wolf and master him or resign his sovereignty. "For a bear with feathers," added the messenger, "is no bear at all, and the king we obey must resemble the rest of us." "I wear feathers because it pleases me," growled the king. "Am I not a great magician? But I will fight nevertheless, and if Wolf masters me, he shall be king in my stead." Then he visited his friends, the gulls, who were even then feasting upon the dead bear, and told them of the coming battle. "I shall conquer," he said proudly. "Yet my people are in the right, for only a hairy one like themselves can hope to command their obedience." The queen gull said, "I met an eagle yesterday, which had made its escape from a big city of men, and the eagle told me he had seen a monstrous polar bear skin thrown over the back of a carriage that rolled along the street. That skin must have been yours, O king, and if you wish I will send 100 of my gulls to the city to bring it back to you." "Let them go," said the king gruffly, and the 100 gulls were soon flying rapidly southward. For 3 days they flew straight as an arrow, until they came to scattered houses, to villages, and to cities. Then their search began. The gulls were brave and cunning and wise. Upon the 4th day they reached the great metropolis, and hovered over the streets until a carriage rolled along with a great white bear robe thrown over the back seat. Then the birds swooped down, the whole 100 of them, and seizing the skin in their beaks flew quickly away. They were late. The king's great battle was upon the 7th day, and they must fly swiftly to reach the polar regions by that time. Meanwhile, the bird bear was preparing for his fight. He sharpened his claws in the small crevasses of the ice. He caught a seal and tested his big yellow teeth by crunching its bones between them. And the queen gull set her band to pluming the king bear's feathers until they lay smoothly upon his body. But every day they cast anxious glances into the southern sky, watching for the 100 gulls to bring back the king's own skin. The 7th day came, and all the polar bears in that region gathered around the king's cavern. Among them was Wolf, strong and confident of his success. "The bird bear's feathers will fly fast enough when I get my claws upon him," he boasted, and the others laughed and encouraged him. The king was disappointed at not having recovered his skin, but he resolved to fight bravely without it. He advanced from the opening of his cavern with a proud and kingly bearing. And when he faced his enemy, he gave so terrible a growl that Woof's heart stopped beating for a moment, and he began to realize that a fight with the wise and mighty king of his race was no laughing matter. After exchanging one or two heavy blows with his foe, Woof's courage returned, and he determined to dishearten his adversary by bluster. "Come nearer, bird-bear," he cried. "Come nearer that I may pluck your plumage." The defiance filled the king with rage. He ruffled his feathers as a bird does, till he appeared to be twice his actual size, and then he strode forward and struck Woof so powerful a blow that his skull crackled like an eggshell and he fell prone upon the ground. While the assembled bears stood looking with fear and wonder at their fallen champion, the sky became darkened. An 100 gulls flew down from above and dripped upon the king's body a skin covered with pure white hair that glittered in the sun like silver. And behold, the bears saw before them the well-known form of their wise and respected master, and with one accord they bowed their shaggy heads in homage to the mighty king of the polar bears. This story teaches us that true dignity and courage depend not upon outward appearance, but come rather from within. Also that brag and bluster are poor weapons to carry into battle. And now as we come to the end of this session, if you're still awake, I would like you to feel the calm you've created within yourself. You've given your mind and body such a beautiful gift, a moment to simply be. Let that sense of peace stay with you as you move through the rest of your night. If you'd like, you can stay here a little longer.